All right, let's talk about carbs. Essentially, carbs and fat loss. This is by far, it's not a fad, though there are fad diets out there around this. This is one of those things that science just can't refute. And science is very good at refuting almost every diet. And in a broad spectrum or a broad perspective, almost all diets are effective if you stick to them. Most times when you have some sort of restriction, so a diet will say something like, oh, only eat rice and chicken, or only eat Mediterranean, or there's a bunch of different, all diets seem to have things you can and can't eat. If you start to restrict what you can and can't eat, typically people lose weight, lose fat and muscle and some other things. But generally speaking, all diets work if you stick to them. Okay, even better, if you restrict carbohydrates, not only are you going to have that social effect, like it's difficult to eat in places, so you generally eat less, and so on and so forth, you actually do have a physiological impact on your cells and your mitochondria, which is an organelle, a little thing living inside each cell is a mitochondria. Now, a cool, if you want to make this kind of real, you know how chickens have white meat and cows have red meat? The reason is the number of mitochondria. So the difference between red and white meat is the density of these little organelles, these little powerhouses inside your cell. And these produce ATP, adenosine triphosphate. They produce energy. The currency of energy in your body is inside cells is ATP, and you can actually affect these little mitochondria with how many carbs you eat, amongst other things. You're going to affect a lot of things. So just think of the reverse. Think of you eating an enormous amount of carbs. And if you're anything like me, you've done this. You've had a bucket of ice cream, eaten a whole thing of potato chips, whatever it is, pasta, it doesn't matter. If you eat a lot of carbs, it has an effect on you. You feel you have feelings, typically lethargy and so on and so forth. But just understand the reverse is opposite. The reverse is true as well. So if you reduce your carbs or even eliminate them, you're going to have some effects. There's a term called keto flu. It was not invented on a whim. It's real. So essentially, you can affect the way your body interacts with food, and not only that, it is also going to affect how awake you are, and your concentration, and you'll even get things like headaches, and there's all sorts of experiences people have. They're transient. They're temporary for the most part. Now, the caveat there, if you actually are diabetic, like if you really do have a problem with blood sugars and insulin resistance, if you just drop yourself down into next to no carbs, you can hurt yourself. Something called diabetic ketoacidosis. And a lot of people are diabetic, and a lot of people are pre-diabetic. So if you're one of those people, just be aware. I'm not saying actually low carb is the best thing for a diabetic, but you can't just go through the fridge, get rid of all your carbs, have zero carbs from now on. You have to kind of titrate, and there's a process, and you can monitor your blood sugars, and you can monitor your ketones, and as you're going through it, to do it safely. But there's a lot of people out there that that are eating way too many carbs, and it has this really powerful effect. Think of carbohydrates think of it like alcohol, right? If you have 4 or 5 drinks of alcohol, that's going to have an effect on you. Now, it affects different people differently, right? Alcohol, the same thing with carbs. So some people are very sensitive to it, and those people tend to be older people or non-athletic people. So kids or athletic people seem to tolerate carbs really well, and they build muscle out of it. They build a muscle sugar called glycogen. You can actually store carbs in your muscle and use it when you're exercising. But if you're not very young and you're not very athletic, the chances are, if you live in the type of world I live in, you're eating way too many carbs. Now, so a simple pullback, most people are normal and healthy and just kind of like have a healthy mindset. They're like, oh, I'll take off a little bit. Good. Let's call that harm reduction. If you're an insane person like me, you'll pull them out completely and just like go through the keto flu and have all these symptoms, and but enormous results. So essentially, for me personally, I lost an enormous amount of body fat very quickly, and also blood glycogen. So essentially, my muscles weren't as full. Now, most people can't tell that. You have to have a lot of muscles to know whether it's full, or if your muscles are full or not. But I have enough that I can see, like, oh, there's like it's more like more solid, more there's more density to it, and what that is typically is glycogen. Now, something people do is called carb loading. They'll have very few carbs over time, over certain 2 weeks, so roughly they titrate down, and then they go eat a lot the day before their race or the day before their event, and this will balloon their muscles up with glycogen because you become very sensitive to it as you lower down, and then when you have a large amount, your body responds really well to store it as muscle sugar. And people do this in endurance events. They do it in bodybuilding competitions. So I just want to give you a sense of what carbs are, carbohydrates, which includes sugars, and there are different terms. It's in pastas and breads. It's a very basic thing. Just do a quick Google search. But I just want to give you an idea that when you're eating carbs and you're removing carbs, you're dealing with a very powerful thing, probably one of the most powerful things in your diet, in the positive or negative direction. It's one of those powerful things in your performance. So if you're playing sports, it'll dramatically increase your speed and your endurance, or dramatically reduce your speed and your endurance. Powerful in your mind, in that, like I said, the feeling after leaving a buffet, that has a lot to do with carbs. Most people don't feel that way after they have a big fatty protein meal. They feel that after carbs. So it affects your mindset, it affects your body and performance, it affects your body composition, like how much fat or muscle you have. The only things more powerful than carbs are outside of your diet. They performance enhancing drugs. So for instance, caffeine has a pretty obvious, have 2 cups of coffee and see how you feel. There are things more powerful and more impactful than carbs, but not many. And so thanks for listening.